In the last lecture, we are discuss about the different steps which are performed at the time of macro designing. We have to do 6 different stages. That is, first of all, to identify the macro calls in the source program. Second thing is nothing but determine the value of formal parameters. Then third thing, maintain the value of expansion time variables declared in a macro. Then organize expansion time control flow, then determine the value of sequencing symbols, and last one is nothing but the perform expansion of a model statement. Okay, now after that we need to discuss the some steps, or we need to discuss different data structures used during these particular 6 design phases. Now, in each design phase, we have to discuss that is different one particular data structure. We consider one particular table corresponding to the given thing. If we consider the macro call, the corresponding data structure should be considered as a macro name table. If we discuss about the parameters, then we consider two tables, that is actual parameter table, and second one is nothing but the parameter default table. If we discuss about the expansion time variables, then here we need to consider, or here we maintain one table, that is the expansion variable table, which contains the definition of expansion time variables. Then next thing is nothing but expansion time control flow. For that purpose, we use macro definition table. Macro definition table contains the all macros, that is we can say model statement are added into that macro definition table. And when we consider about the sequencing symbols in the fifth step, then we need to maintain all the sequencing symbol. We consider sequencing symbol table. We store the information corresponding to that of the sequencing symbol. And last thing, when we consider the expansion of a model statements, for that purpose, we also consider the expansion variable table to perform or to maintain that particular representation. Okay, we consider each and every data structure. Now, which fields are used in every data structure, every table in the given macro preprocessor designing. Now, today we discuss about the different fields used in that data structures. Here, first of all, we consider the macro name table. This is the data structure corresponding to that of the macro name table. We can see this table structure here, macro name, that is where we consider the prototype statement of the macro definition, and in that prototype statement we can identify the name of the macro, we can insert in this particular field. Then hash pp, in the sense that is the number of positional parameters, how many positional parameters are given in that macro, we pass that integer number. Here keyword parameter, that is hash kp, can be represents the keyword parameter. Hash ev represents the number of expansion variables. Now the integer number should be represented at this particular point. Next thing is nothing but the pointer to MDT, that is a macro definition table. Here macro definition table contains the actual definition of the given macro. ज्या नावाचा macro इथे define करतो त्याची actual definition त्या ठिकाणी असणार आहे. Now in the macro definition table, at what point or in which location that particular macro definition will start, that pointer should be maintained in this macro name table. Okay, then pointer to the kpt dp, in the sense here pointer to the keyword parameter default table. Here we consider the keyword parameter and corresponding default table is also maintained, that is the default table parameter, default parameter table. In that case, here we consider that default parameter entry corresponding to that the kp. If here keyword parameters are not given there, that is there are 0 keyword parameters, then this entry is also null. Okay, there is no entry for that particular default value. Then pointer to the sequencing symbol, if such a symbol is available, then we can use that number of sequencing symbols, that is pointer to sequencing symbol table. Here the sequencing symbols are stored into the sequencing symbol table, and we can use that particular pointer value at this particular location. Now this single row correspond, or a single row store the information corresponding to the single macro. Okay, single macro name. When we call that particular macro, we can see all these field shorthand. Here we can represent what is the pp, what is the kp, what is ev, then mdtp, then kpdtp, then sstp. Okay, all these things are the shorthand expressions will be considered here. Here we need to represent the C structure corresponding to this table data structure. Now you know very well that is we store the information in the tabular form. We can consider the structure in C programming language. We need to define this particular structure when we design that macro preprocessor. Okay, in that structure we simply put these things into that corresponding values. All these values are given in the form of integers. So pp number of parameters, positional parameter, number of keyword parameter, number of expansion variable, etc. All these are nothing but the integer value. Our name of the macro should be given in the character field, and we can use here MNT, that is maximum of 50. Here we given that array of structure we will be created at this particular point. MNT, that is the data type you should be created having a 50 macro definition or 50 macro names should and corresponding information should be put into this particular type of C data structure. Okay. Now next data structure, here we consider the parameter name table. Now in first macro name table we can say pointer to the MDT, pointer to the KPT, and pointer to the SST. Now we also consider all these MDT, KPT, and SST data structure also, that table also. Here parameter name table contains the name of the parameter. Okay, it should enter in this table, that is in the same order as a macro prototype statement. When we consider this particular parameter name table, all the formal parameter definition should put into this particular table. This is the single field table. We can consider this type of data structure, or we consider this type of a variable corresponding to that of the parameter name table. In short, we can say PN tab. Then third data structure, we use expansion variable name table. We consider it EVN tab. It contains the name of expansion variable. Those expansion variables which are used in our macro definition, we can put them into this particular table. Okay, this is the C statement to declare that particular, or to access or to store that expansion variable names with character EVN tab, two-dimensional array, that is 3030. Okay, then expansion variable table EV tab. Here we can store the expansion time variable name, and here we can store value of a expansion time variable. Okay, this is the EV tab. It contains the value of expansion variable corresponding to this expansion variable. त्याच्या corresponding values या ठिकाणी काय केले जाते, store केले जाते. That is both things where we differentiate, because when we declare the expansion variable, we can use the corresponding ANOP statement. Okay, the declaration part is different, and when we use this particular expansion variable, the corresponding value should be assigned to that by the model statement to the given expansion variable. So these two data structure are separated with each other. Okay, then next thing is nothing but the sequencing symbol table. Okay, it is a it contains the sequencing symbol name, that is the sequencing symbol name. We use this particular table. Okay, sequencing symbol table, here sequencing symbol name will be stored, and here sequencing symbol table that contains the model statement where the sequencing symbol appears in the field. लेबल फील्डला सिक्वेन्सिंग सिम्बॉल कुठे आयडेंटिफाय झाला ते मॉडेल स्टेटमेंटची एंट्री इथे काय केली जाते, पुट केली जाते, आणि ही एंट्री कुठनं मिळते तुम्हाला, मॅक्रो डेफिनेशन टेबल मधनं मिळते. दॅट इज हियर वी कॅन से द कॉलम MDT entry hash, that is that particular position or that number should be added at this particular sequencing symbol table. Then last thing is nothing but the keyword parameter default table. Here we can store the default values of the keyword parameters. Keyword parameter name and corresponding default value should be stored at this particular data structure. These are the different data structures can be used at the in case of that particular the macro preprocessor designing. Here actual parameter table contains the list of actual parameters. We can see this is the actual parameter name, and in this actual parameter name we can store the name of that actual parameter when where it is identified at the time of macro call. That actual parameter should be identified. And last thing is our last table, that is the very most important table, macro definition table. Now it contains the label of code operands in the process form, that is intermediate code of the model statement. Those model statement are comes under the definition of the macro. All these model statement are added into that particular macro definition table. Now all parameter name in the model statements are replaced by pair of the form p hashian, where hashian is the ordinal number of the parameter in pn tab. Okay, पॅरामीटर नेम टाइप आपण आताच बघितला, त्या टेबल मध्ये त्या पर्टिक्युलर पॅरामीटरची पोझिशन कुठली आहे तो नंबर इथे काय केला जाईल, पी comma n, that number of the parameter. Okay, p in the sense parameter. Then expansion time variables are replaced by pair of the form e hash n, where hash n is also ordinal number of the ev in the evn tab. तो expansion variable evn tab मध्ये कोणत्या पोझिशनला स्टोर आहे तो नंबर तिथे वापरला जाईल. ती पेअर त्या ठिकाणी काय केली जाते मॅक्रो डेफिनेशन टेबल मध्ये वापरली जाते. देन सिक्वेन्सिंग सिम्बॉल आर रिप्लेस्ड बाय द पेअर ऑफ द फॉर्म यस हॅश n. We can consider this yes hash n corresponding to that sequencing symbol. N also represent the number ordinal position in the sequencing symbol table. Okay, now here we can consider this is the structure corresponding to the macro definition table. Here we can see all these particular information corresponding to the macro definition table. Here we represent the serial number of the given macro statements. Here macro definition contains, that is the table which are constructed at the time of macro definition: MNT, macro name table, PN table, KPD tab, that is keyword parameter, default value table, expansion variable name table, macro definition table. This is the summary corresponding to the preprocessor, designing of the macro preprocessor data structure. All these data structures are used. Okay, at the time of for corresponding to the definition, these are the number of data structure. When we call the macro, actual parameter table should be built, that is the 8 number data structure. And when macro expansion where takes place, expansion variable table should be designed. म्हणजे कोणते टेबल केव्हा परफॉर्म होता किंवा त्या ठिकाणी कुठले कोणते टेबल कोणत्या टायमिंगला त्या ठिकाणी जनरेट केले जातील, that is the summary for that type of task. Okay, at the time of macro definition, scanning of the macro definition, we can create all these data structure, that is up to sequencing symbol name table and sequencing symbol table. And when we call the macro, actual parameter table is generated, and when we expand the macro or the macro expansion takes place, at that time expansion variable table should be generated. That is the summary for that particular data structure using that macro. We are summarize all these corresponding tasks in this particular statement, that is PN tab and KPD tab. Constructed by processing the property statement. Entries are added to the AVN tab and SSN tab as EV declared and SS definition references are encountered. Then MDT are constructed while processing the model statements and preprocessor statement in the macro body. Okay, then entry is added to the SS tab when the definition of the sequencing symbol is encountered. Okay, at the next step, that is AP tab, actual parameter table is constructed while processing the macro call. Then if expansion variable table is constructed at the start of the expansion of a macro. That is, this particular summary can be considered in case of the statement form. Okay, this is nothing but the complete summary for that macro preprocessor data structure designing. Okay, next we need to consider the example corresponding to that of the macro preprocessor data structure, because we have practical to design the macro preprocessor. We design the macro preprocessor. The main aim or main task of your designing of macro preprocessor is to show all these particular data structure. Okay, if a practical shows you, that is you need to generate the corresponding data structures with the help of this particular example. We have to given one program, assembly program, and we need to generate all these data structure in that particular macro preprocessor. Okay, now here we consider this particular macro definition, that is DECR is the name of the macro, then and A and B are the positional parameters, then the model statements under this particular macro definition, that is MOR, sub, MOM, then MEND. Here the definition of first macro is completed, then definition of second macro will start at this particular point, that is macro clear mem, that is a clear memory. Here we can use two positional parameter and one default or keyword parameter. Here we can pass one default value also. Then one LCL, it is the expansion variable, where expansion variable is used at this particular location, set 0. Okay, the value of this expansion variable will be set with the value 0. We can use the set statement to set the value of expansion variable. Then model statement corresponding to that is nothing but the MOR. Then more statement is the label statement, and here we can have the dot. Okay, it is also one of the expansion variable can be used at this particular location. Okay, now all these things are the second macro will end at this particular position. Okay, here a if statement is given there, and dot more statement can be identified at this particular location. Next thing is nothing but we can start our program at this 100 position, read P, read Q, that is the actual parameter. We can call DECR macro. This is the DECR macro. Macro call will be takes place, and actual parameter P and Q will be passed to that of the formal parameter. Then clear memory area comma 10. This second macro will be called at this particular location. Area comma 10. These two parameters are given to that of the two positional parameter corresponding to that. Okay, and at the end here we can consider the end statement. This is our program, but before that we can define two types of a macro, macro. We need to define all these data structure. What happened, that is, first of all we create the macro name table. In that macro name table we identify two types of a macro, two names of a given macro. First macro name is nothing but the DECR, and second macro name is nothing but the CLRMEM. So here we can use macro name contains DECR and CLRMEM. Okay. Now in the first macro, we can consider the we can represent all the entries of the first macro in the macro name table. How many positional parameters? There are two positional parameters given here. Only positional parameters can be given. Okay, 2. So here we can say pp hash pp entry contains 2. There is no keyword parameter, so here we can give dash. Then expansion variable is not available in the first macro. Here is nothing but the first macro definition till this particular position. This is the first macro. Okay, there is no expansion variable, so we can give dash. Then pointer to the MDT macro definition table, where this particular entry or when that particular entry is completed. Okay, when your macro definition table is constructed, after identifying all these three things, we design the macro definition table. In the macro definition table, there is no previous entry. Previously, macro definition table is empty. First macro definition will be added our DECR macro. Okay, this first macro will be added into the definition. So we can consider that macro definition table at this particular location. We can see this is the macro name, macro definition table. The first statement of the first macro is the first model statement. Okay, DECR चं पहिलं मॉडेल स्टेटमेंट इथे दिसतंय. कोणत्या नंबरला येते? फर्स्ट पोझिशनला आहे. फर्स्ट नंबरला इथे स्टार्ट झालंय. So here we can put 1. Then pointer to the KPT. There is no keyword parameter, so there is no pointer here available. There is no sequencing symbol, so there is no particular entry corresponding to this particular field. Okay, this is the information corresponding to DECR in the macro name. Second macro name is nothing but the clear memory. We can represent that clear memory macro, which is start at this particular point up to this particular position. We can identify two positional parameter and one keyword parameter. So we can give the entry corresponding to that two positional parameter, one keyword parameter, and here we can identify that one sequencing symbol. Okay, that is nothing but the LCL. So we can use here expansion variable also when given there. Okay, we can use this particular expansion variable as 1. Pointer to MDT, at what point position will be identified as a 5. How? That is the first statement, second statement, third statement. Fourth statement in the macro definition table should be added as a end statement. We can see this end statement, that is the end of first macro, which identify this end statement in the macro definition table, that is end of the macro. And then at the or from the fifth location we can start the second macro. It is the first macro definition. Okay, fifth statement पासून किंवा पाचव्या नंबर पासून तुमचा काय झालाय, second macro चं definition start झाली. So here we can put the entry 5. Then pointer to the KPT, we can use KPT keyword parameter. Okay, pointer keyword parameter ला पहिल्याच पोझिशनला तुमचे keyword parameter स्टोर आहे. त्यामुळे काय झालं, इथे आपण 1 दिला आणि सिक्वेन्सिंग सिम्बॉल मध्ये पण तो 1 काय केलं जाईल या ठिकाणी पुट केला जाईल. Now we can see here in the given definition, expansion variable name is nothing but the yum, and sequencing symbol is nothing but the dot more. Okay, this is our sequencing symbol. Now we can see these entries in the given table. We can consider this KPT tab. Okay, keyword parameter name table. This is the AND register default value should be assigned to it at this particular point. Then we can define SSN tab, that is sequencing symbol name table. We can consider more as a sequencing symbol name. Expansion variable, that is the yum, we can put that particular name. And SS tab, sequencing symbol table, contains the entry in the MDT. एमडीटी मध्ये त्याची व्हॅल्यू आपण देतो, म्हणजे ती एंट्री एमडीटी मध्ये तो सिक्वेन्सिंग सिम्बॉल कोणत्या लोकेशनला यूज होतोय, दॅट इज द पोझिशन नंबर 8, म्हणजे 8व्या स्टेटमेंटला तो वापरला गेलाय, ती एंट्री इथे वापरली जाईल. एक्सपान्शन व्हेरिएबल टेबल, the value should be set to 0, so we can consider the expansion variable value at this particular point. Then actual parameter table, when macro will be called, at that time we can use these two, P and Q for the first macro, area 10 and A register for the second macro. This value, when we call the second macro, that is area comma 10, these are the actual parameter for second macro, and PQ are the actual parameter of the first macro. And here clear memory, the last variable is nothing but A register, which is the default value. This will be identified in this particular actual parameter. Now we need to focus on the macro definition table, how that particular entry should be added. We design intermediate representation in assembly language. Here same thing can be happen in this particular representation. We need to consider that intermediate representation. If we can identify the parameter, then we can use here P comma 2. P comma 2 in the sense, here we can consider first statement before, that is move RB register P comma 1. We can see the definition. Move RB register and A. And A, this is the positional parameter, and the location of that positional parameter in the parameter name table is nothing but the 1. This is the position 1. This is the position number 2. Okay, this is the position number 3. There, then it is the 4, and this will be considered as a 5. So here we can use P and 1. Okay, in case of the macro definition table, we also discuss the corresponding how these parameters should be represented with intermediate representation. Here it is the parameter, so we can use P, and it is available at the first position, so we can use here 1. Then next thing is nothing but sub B register P comma 2. P is the parameter, and B, that is we can see this particular statement, that is the second statement, B sub B register comma B. B, it is the positional parameter and which is identified at the second location, so we can put here 2. Move MB register P1, we can see this particular sub A, that is move MB register comma A. This is the first parameter, so we can use here P comma 1, and we can end the macro. Likewise here we can consider local variable will be declared, local expansion variable consider, it is the expansion variable definition, so E comma #1, that is we can see that statement set, okay, we declare this particular statement, this is the local state LCL and M, this is the expansion variable first statement, and expansion variable it is the first. Okay, so we can write here E comma 1. If we can identify the second position, that second number for the given variable, we can put here 2. Accordingly, we can consider all these particular statement. Okay, this is nothing but the definition of the macro name table. We need to design all these data structure corresponding to that of the that of every macro. Okay, this is nothing but the example and the corresponding data structures which is designed at the time of macro pre-processing. Okay, we can conclude our first example, that is how macro definition, or how that particular macro preprocessor designer or macro preprocessor can generate all these things. All these particular representations are used to create the assembly instruction. Okay, macro preprocessor, main task of the macro preprocessor is what? To create the program without macro, and to represent such a things without macro, we need to expand that macro. And when we want to expand, or when that macros will be expanded, at that time all these data structures should be used at that particular point during the macro expansion. Okay, that is nothing but the task of that macro preprocessor, and the data structure used corresponding to that of the macro preprocessor. This is nothing but the example, same example can be asked during the examination for 5 marks. Draw the different data structures corresponding to that of the given program with macro. Okay, this type of example which is given in the exam, and we need to design all these data structure from macro name table to up to actual parameter table or EVN table. Okay, we need to design all these data structures. Accordingly, we can solve the more than one examples which are given in your book also. We check them and identify the corresponding entries in the given table. Okay, we can conclude at this particular point.